Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom. It is an honor to be with you this morning, to be able to share some words of reflection connected to the challenges of Rosh Hashanah in the year ahead. Esperanto is a constructed language created by a man named Ludwik Lazar Zamenhof. He was a Polish-Jewish ophthalmologist in 1887. During his life, Zamenhof became fascinated by the idea of creating a tolerant world, free from the horrors of war. Being Jewish in Poland at the time of Russian pogroms, and as anti-Semitism continued to increase, Zamenhof dreamed of a day when people could come together. To make this world a reality, he decided the best thing to do would be to create a universal language that would allow people to converse. And he prodded Esperantists, and I quote, break down the walls between peoples. Through Esperanto, a world where interethnic hatred would disappear because people could communicate with each other. Of course, a world safer for the Jews. What a wonderful utopian idea, right? It sounds good, but I think the Torah would say it was not so good. It was indeed misdirected, even destructive. The story of the Tower of Babel in the early part of the book of Genesis speaks against this utopian dream. After the flood, when Noah's descendants multiplied and began to settle in the land of Shinar, otherwise known as Babylon, the text says the following: everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them hard. There they decide to build a great city with a tall tower. God sees what the people are building and becomes upset over the tower. So God confounds the people's speech, rendering them unable to communicate with each other, and scatters them across the earth. And of course, they stop building the city and its tower. Now, what's so bad about using the same language and the same words? What had the people of Babel really done wrong? One great biblical scholar, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who lived in the 19th century, observes that although the opening verses tell us that the builders all had the same words, it never tells us anything about what those words actually were. That, he argues, is precisely the point. And I quote, God was not distressed by what they said, but by the thought that their words, and by implication their thoughts, were all the same. God finds this uniformity alarming, because total uniformity is necessarily a sign of totalitarian control. After all, absolute consensus does not happen naturally on any matter, let alone on every matter. It is usually enforced by oppression and repression. Our commentator is arguing that the builders wanted Babel to be the capital of the world, in the center of ideological enforcement, a totalitarian society. This enforced consensus explains the building of the tower. The skyscraper would serve as a watchtower from which to monitor the residents and keep them in line. This biblical nightmare is chilling. Unity is one thing. Uniformity is quite another. Making everything simple, even one-dimensional, imposing one way of thinking, reducing everything to one catchphrase should concern us. Judaism does not like simplicity or uniformity. We do not enjoy monotones. We want a world that is modulated in tones, rich in complexity. Rosh Hashanah is an incredible example of it. The holiday seems so simple, the new year. It isn't. Here is how complex it really is. This holiday has 5 names. Yom Harat Olam, the birthday of the world. Yom Teruah, the day of the blowing of the shofar. Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, because Jews pray that God will remember them in this coming year. Yom HaDin, the day of judgment, and refers to the image of God sitting on a throne determining the fate of every Jew in the upcoming year. And of course, the name Rosh Hashanah, which literally means head of the year. 5 names, one isn't enough. The blowing of the shofar. Why are there so many notes? The tradition offers multiple patterns. And instead of deciding one over the other, the rabbi said, let's do them all. We don't want to decide. They all make sense. I could keep this list going of the intricacies and complexities of Rosh Hashanah, but I've made my point. A day rich in meaning, complexity, the rough and tumble of a people and ideas engaging with each other. Because every aspect of the tradition is so sacred that we dare not leave something out or judge one part of the tradition better than others. All the rabbinic traditions were woven together. Nothing was left on the editing floor. Complicated, isn't it? But this kind of holy, creative, artful variation in complexity is not our world. Compare this vision of robust diversity and creativity to our world where tribalism has arisen. We have set up camps. Tribalism is the opposite of diversity. It is an irrational loyalty to our own group, our party, our piece of the pie. It leads to combat and confrontation because my tribe affirms its superiority to another tribe and must dominate the other tribe in order to feel safe and validated. The other person or group is the enemy, not a neighbor, not a partner. You don't have a dialogue with another tribe. You create walls because you have made them into the enemy. Layla Lalami, a New York Times columnist, writes of modern phenomena of tribalism when she wrote, "Modern tribes rule over separate territories, listen to different oracles, uphold distinct values, and dismiss contradictory information as unreliable propaganda or fake news." Welcome to tribal Washington, D.C., where people vote the party line as if they are tame circus animals. If you seek compromise, you're a traitor. Let's not forget that in a not-so-distant past, Republicans and Democrats would argue, but after hours they drank scotch, played poker, and had weekend barbecues together with their families. Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy would argue like hell. Then the time of debate expired. Kennedy and Hatch shook hands and exchanged jokes. They laughed throughout the halls of Congress, slapping each other on the back. And Kennedy once said, and this is such a beautiful description of what I'm trying to describe, he said, "We have a difference in terms of perhaps how we are going to achieve the objectives. But I don't really feel that I have a difference with Orrin in terms of what the objectives ought to be. If you build upon that kind of understanding and respect, you can get a lot of things done." If we spend any time on social media, we find examples of a toxic rhetoric such as, "I hear what you said. If you believe that, unfriend me. We have nothing to talk about anymore." It doesn't matter what provocative topic is on the table. If you back some idea that is unacceptable to a larger clique of same-minded people, you're canceled. Both the left and the right do it. We in America today are quick to cancel those whom we disagree. Now, thank goodness there is some pushback. On July 7th, 153 public intellectuals, writers, artists, critics on both sides of the political spectrum published a letter in Harper Magazine concerning this toleration of differences or lack thereof. I quote, "Free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted. We uphold the value of robust and even caustic counter-speech from all quarters, but it is now all too common to hear calls for swift and severe retribution in response to perceived transgressions of speech and thought. Whatever the arguments around each particular incident, the result has been to steadily narrow the boundaries of what can be said without the threat of reprisal. The stifling atmosphere will ultimately harm the most vital causes of our time." Close quote. The zeitgeist of our time is a hostility towards those who disagree with us. The way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away. In a liberal society, a person should not be pushed out or demeaned if they say something that you disagree with, even if you find it distasteful. How do you respond to someone with whom you disagree? We bring a counter-argument, not a personal attack. The answer is not in resolution of the argument, but in the relationship created by the two sides as a result of their engagement. George Orwell said it so beautifully in the middle of World War II when he wrote, "The thing that strikes me more and more is the extraordinary viciousness and dishonesty of political controversy in our time. I don't mean merely that controversies are acrimonious. They ought to be that when they are on serious subjects. I mean that almost nobody seems to feel that an opponent deserves a fair hearing, or that the objective truth matters as long as you can score a neat debating point. Indeed, even as far back as the Talmudic times, we Jews confronted the complexities of open thought. It was never easy to be a free thinker." Elisha ben Abuya was a brilliant Talmudic scholar who struggled with how unfair the world was. He was unwilling to accept Rabbi Akiva's view that suffering is to be cherished in this world because the reward will be given in the next world. His spiritual restlessness led him to study outside of Judaism. He especially focused in on Greek culture and thought. He was a Talmudic genius, and people sought his wisdom. But this complex life between Judaism and Greek culture became untenable for him. He could no longer accept that God would permit innocent people to die. His entire faith system collapsed when he witnessed the death of a child in the process of fulfilling a mitzvah. He left the rabbinic community, even trying to convince other students to leave with him, telling them that they should get real jobs as carpenters and craftspeople. For his heresy, Elisha ben Abuya earned the name Acher, other, and became the ancient example of attempting to blot out unpopular or dangerous ideas. But that's not the end of the story. Elisha had a student, Rabbi Meir, who refused to detach himself from his teacher. He believed that he still had much to learn from him and remained his student to the end of Elisha's life. Why did Rabbi Meir, a respected scholar, keep Acher as his teacher? By remaining in dialogue with Acher, the other, Rabbi Meir remained open to a great teacher who offered an alternative view of religion and reality. the professor you love because they are brilliant and outrageous and they make you think. The essence of rabbinic Judaism, the foundation of what we practice today, is healthy argument. A pair of students are encouraged to disagree. There's always something to be learned, especially from those whom we most vehemently disagree. In rabbinic learning, resolution happens when the dominant side incorporates the needs and worries of the weaker side into its own argument. Success is achieved for everyone when both sides continue to recognize the legitimacy and sincerity of their counterparts. And even when we are certain that we are right in our own position, the other who contradicts our position may be a corrective or our check against going to excess. Jews, to a certain extent, are controversy seekers. We need our intellectual and political sparring partners to remain humble and honest. Now, friends, there's something that's self-evident. We haven't spoken about it. We're not in the New Reformed Temple sanctuary. We are broadcasting this service from Village Presbyterian Church. And the generosity and graciousness of this church is without end. You have no idea, standing here, what it's like to look out at this magnificent sanctuary. But I have to let you in on a secret. We are not Presbyterians. There are significant disagreements between Presbyterians and Jews. Our relationship is rooted in passionate conversations about faith. How does one serve God? How do you deal with sin? Who or what is the Messiah? Has the covenant of Abraham been replaced by another covenant? These are profound disagreements about many things, including the status of the state of Israel. They are holy conversations, holy arguments, spiritual controversies that we probably will continue to have to the end of times. They will never be resolved. But the bond we share as human beings in mutual respect is the basis of these controversies. These controversies should not have winners or losers. They are holy arguments by people who seek to love God, and in truth, both of us are right. And neither of us have the complete answers. And in the end, it is the respectful, loving conversation that matters. If we can make this work at Village Presbyterian on Rosh Hashanah, on this very day, we can make this work outside of the sanctuary and take this teaching into the world. In a world where people just don't seem to be able to converse with each other and instead break apart, create walls, delegitimize the other, let us model in our lives, in our families, in our country, and in our houses of prayer that we can talk, that we can argue, that we can disagree, that we can see the future of our country differently without dismissing the other as evil. Because in the end, there must be love, respect, recognition of the dignity of the other. We have an upward battle, but must not give up on this noble idea. Our ability to live together with each other productively and peacefully depends on it. The whole world is in our hands. Amen.